Okay, now we're following on here to, this is the last half of chapter 25. Section 25.4 discusses the accessory organs that I mentioned, the liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. These are not directly attached to the alimentary tract, but they all secrete different products into the small intestine that is very important with digestion. First is the liver. The gross anatomy of the liver is shown in figure 25.19, page 969. It has two different lobes, and this makes it quite nice if a person has to have a liver transplant from someone else. Very commonly, the left lobe of the donor is removed and then attached into the person who's receiving the transplant, and this can be done, quote, quite simply, unquote, by a surgeon who's done a lot of these. Okay, I want the anterior side just shows the very smooth anterior portion of the liver, and it is divided by the round ligament into the two lobes, as I showed you, or as I mentioned. It is in the right side of the upper abdomen, just below the diaphragm, and protected quite nicely by the rib cage. Figure C shows the view, the posterior view of the liver, showing the inferior vena cava, the gallbladder, the bile duct, the hepatic vein, and the hepatic artery. The blood system, the circulation to the liver is quite interesting in that all veins from the stomach and small intestines go through the liver and then via the hepatic portal vein into the inferior vena cava. It must go through the liver in order to go then into the vena cava and on into the heart. That is quite important. There's also shows, of course, the hepatic arteries that supply arterial blood. The gallbladder is quite interesting. It's a very small pouch that stores bile. Bile is a thick secretion formed by the liver, and this bile is secreted when it's not needed into the small intestine and is very important in the digestion, mostly of fats. Unfortunately, the gallbladder can get obstructed quite easily if stones develop from the secretions that are inside of it. The gallbladder can be removed now quite easily, and a person can live quite well without it. Figures 25-20 and show the microscopic anatomy of the liver that likewise is quite complex. I want you to read very closely on the previous page about the hepatic lobule that the liver is divided into, and you'll see a photomicrograph of that, and you'll also see what's called a hepatic sinusoid. The liver has an unbelievably large number of functions that we'll talk about in just a moment. Figure 25.21 shows the anatomy not only of the gallbladder, but shows how closely it is located to the first part of the small intestine, the duodenum, as well as to the other accessory organ called the pancreas. The hepatic ducts lead directly into the small intestine, but they pass through the pancreas. The gallbladder duct, or the cystic duct, feeds into the bile duct before the common duct goes into the pancreas. Very unique. The pancreas has two different functions. One we studied back in chapter 17. Part of the pancreas secretes or synthesizes and secretes insulin. These are the beta cells. And the alpha cells are separate. You can't see those grossly, but the alpha cells secrete glycogen, which is also important in the digestion of glucose and other carbohydrates. Figure 25.22 shows the microscopic anatomy of the pancreas. The pancreas is made up of thousands and thousands of small glands that make many different enzymes. They are all listed in table 25.2 on page 973. I want you to at least have heard the names of these different secretions and enzymes. On page 973 is a small section that talks about the regulation of the secretion of these enzymes from the pancreas. Section 25.5 discusses the small intestine. First, the figure 25.24 shows the gross anatomy of the small intestine. It's very important to realize that almost all chemical digestion and nutrient absorption occurs in this small intestine. That varies in length, but it is somewhere about 5 meters in length. It was very interesting to me the first time I helped with surgery in an abdomen to see these numerous coils of small intestine. As it says here, almost 15 feet of them. The small intestine is divided into 3 sections. First is the duodenum, that's very short, only about 10 inches, 25 centimeters. This is where the bile duct and the pancreatic duct empty into the small intestine, and also where the stomach contents first enter the small intestine. This is followed by another section, about 40% of the small intestine, called the jejunum. Finally, the ileum. You can only tell the ileum from the jejunum microscopically, other than if you are physically inside the abdomen. You can tell that the ileum is the part that ends up opening up into the large intestine. At the what's called the ileocecal valve, shown in figure 25.24, that is the terminal ileum, and that is where the tiny little worm-like structure called the appendix is located. And I'm sure all of you have heard of the appendix. This is just a little residual piece of anatomy that has no function whatsoever now in our bodies. However, if it can get inflamed, if it is obstructed, and this can lead to the need for surgery, the surgery being called an appendectomy. Okay, microscopic anatomy of the small intestine is shown on page 976, figure 25.25. In the stomach, we saw various crypts into the mucosa. In the small intestine, it's kind of the reverse. There are numerous villi that extend from the mucosa out into the lumen of the small intestine. The importance of these thousands of villi is to greatly increase the area of absorption, as well as the different numerous cells that can secrete more mucus and enzymes into the small intestine. Please study these villi that are shown on page 976, as well as the discussion back on page 975. Figure 25.26 shows the two different types of muscular contractions of the small intestine. It is very important that both of these types of contraction occur, and that they occur in a coordinated fashion. Otherwise, this can lead to a lot of annoying as well as more serious problems inside of the abdomen. Section 25.6 is very involved, a lot of chemistry here, and this is called the chemical digestion and absorption. I cannot lecture about every piece of this and every part of this because I'm sorry, it is just too complex to be handled just by listening to me and looking at me. You will probably see a question or two on your unit exam from this section of the chapter. You must understand that carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids are all digested and then absorbed in different fashion. They all end up almost exclusively, of course, in the capillaries that surround the small intestine. Interestingly, though, is that some of the lipids actually end up in, I don't know if there's a good picture or not. Nope, I don't see a good picture. Oh, there it is, page 2530. These end up in the lymph channels. Some of it goes into the blood, some of it into the lymph channel. Very interesting. All right, now, figure 25.31 is a very good summary. It's a whole page. It shows the summary of the digestion and absorption of all of the major organic nutrients. of the probable 2, maybe 3 questions on your exam. I'll bet you that you could answer at least 1 or 2 of them just by looking at this particular figure. Section 25.7 discusses the large intestine. The gross anatomy of the intestine, as well as the rectum, which is a part of the large intestine, is shown on page 985 in figure 25.32. In part A of that figure, you can see the ileocecal valve again. You see the appendix. You'll see the opening where the ileum opens up into the initial part of the small intestine. The small intestine is broken up into different portions. First is the ascending colon, ascending meaning to go up. Then there's the transverse colon that goes from our right side across to the left side. The descending colon goes down and ends in the sigmoid colon. And then finally, all of the leftover food products and waste is excreted or passes into the rectum and then out through the anal canal and the anus. Even though this looks quite simple, there are a lot of different important things that must take place in this large intestine in order for us to be able to expel our waste products. I want you to both study more about the gross anatomy than the microscopic anatomy. Also look at figure 25.33, which shows the neural control of defecation. This actually is initiated from the cerebral cortex. And there's a feedback loop that is shown in green. When our brain knows that our rectum is full of feces, this initiates the process called defecation. Okay, again, I want you to read about that as you look at the picture there. And that ends my discussion of chapter 25. Thank you for listening.